Generally on Topic Arlo, I like to cover very recent news stories, just kind of do like really basic like news reaction kind of stuff. But we're trying something a little bit different today. I want to do a little bit more of like a traditional discussion video, the kind that I would normally put on my main channel. We're discussorizing, we're speculating. It's a fun change of pace. This is just one of those things that I have been thinking about. So, Switch 2, I know, unique topic. Naturally, we have all been wondering, what will the next system be like? But not just what will the next system be like, I also like to wonder, how exactly will Nintendo transition into the next generation? It's not just a matter of releasing new hardware, there's a lot of other stuff that has to happen to kind of ease into it. My instinct up until pretty recently has been, do the same thing again. Just do the Switch, but again, do another pretty low-powered system that you can sell for cheap. And logically, this would mean that if the original Switch is more in line with like an Xbox 360 or a PS3 in terms of like graphical capabilities, then the Switch 2 should be like an Xbox One or a PS4. I'll just say PS4 from here on out. That's always made the most sense to me. It's the same strategy again because it's a winning strategy. But recent rumors, if they are to be believed, suggest that the next system is going to be a bit more powerful than I originally expected, possibly instead of like a PS4, more like a PS4 Pro, more like kind of a step in between last gen and this gen, in terms, again, of graphical capability. And I thought this sounded iffy at first. It just didn't really make sense. Why would Nintendo make the system more powerful than it needs to be? All that's going to do is make it more expensive to produce and develop for, and Nintendo doesn't want that. However, I have gotten thinking about it, as Arlos are wont to do, and I've started to see it. And it could not be true. It might not. It might end up just being like a PS4, or maybe even weaker. That was always what I kind of imagined. It's like a step below a PS4, but like good enough. They like good enough, so that's what I keep imagining. But now I'm starting to see this new way of thinking. A different kind of strategy has been forming in my head, and now that I've imagined this different strategy, I can't help but feel like it's the best one. I'm convinced that this might really be what Nintendo is doing, especially if the Switch 2 is going to be more like a PS4 Pro. So here's what I think is going to happen. Here, I just want to lay out my whole theory. I touched on this in a previous video. I gave like a quick version of it, but I want to go more in depth here. Okay, so instead of making a pretty low power, cheap Switch 2, instead of that, they make it beefier. They make it more in line with a PS4 Pro. This means that it is more expensive to manufacture, and thus they sell it at a higher price too. Maybe $400, $450, much closer to the price of the competition. This means that it is not a budget system. Nintendo is not aiming to get every family to buy multiple of them. Essentially, this thing is kind of a luxury item. It's a more expensive kind of hobbyist luxury item for people with a lot more expendable income who want something a little beefier. And that's really super not Nintendo's thing, but eventually it makes sense. So early on in the generation, this higher price and more power means fewer sales at first, maybe a lot fewer. It means a much slower transition from Switch 1 to Switch 2, transition between the generations, much slower. But that's okay, because this is part of a long-term plan. Because in the meantime, they lower the price of the original Switch family of systems. And the Switch is already pretty affordable, especially thanks to like the Switch Lite. But now you're lowering the price even more. Now the original Switch is kind of like the 3DS was in its later years. This really affordable system. It's so cheap that everyone in the family can easily get one, and it's got this massive library of games. I mean, like the Switch, it's the 3DS, but like times 10. The library is just so incredibly massive. So this strategy means that Nintendo is not immediately phasing out the original Switch, and way earlier in the generation they were talking about how they wanted to support the Switch for maybe like 10 years, and this really goes along with that. The first few years of the Switch 2's life, they are still actively supporting the Switch. This is like a two-tiered strategy or something. Now they have this cheap budget system and they have this beefier luxury item. Okay, what does this do for them? Because as we know, overall power is really not that important to Nintendo. But in this case, that extra bit of power can really work for them. Over the last few years, people talking about the idea of a Switch 2, many people have presented the idea that backwards compatibility might not be as easy as we feel like it would be. It could be that the hardware architecture is going to be so different that it's not going to be as simple as just making it play the earlier games. The system might have to use emulation to run Switch games, and emulation takes a lot of processing power. So a lot of people have been, will it be possible for the Switch 2 to be strong enough to emulate Switch 1 games? And I really don't know a lot about that side of things. You know, it could be that they only need to rely somewhat on emulation. I know you can do like a mix of emulation. They've done that kind of thing before. I'm not really sure. The point is, though, a more powerful Switch 2 means that backwards compatibility is probably going to be a lot easier. It is going to be so much easier for Nintendo to let people run their Switch libraries on the Switch 2, which is another thing that's going to make this generational transition much easier. That's a humongous selling point for the Switch 2. That's one of the biggest things when people are talking about what Switch 2 needs, it's backwards compatibility. So then, if the Switch 2 can easily run Switch 1 games, because of this flawless backwards compatibility, Nintendo can do what we're seeing all of these other companies doing, Xbox and Sony. They can lean way more into cross-gen titles during the first few years of the system's life. Maybe for the first, 2 entire years of the Switch 2's life, basically every first-party Nintendo game comes in 2 versions, Switch 1 and Switch 2, with better graphics and all that stuff. This would come with a natural downside. You know, if you are you're aiming for parity between these 2 versions, it means that they're not going to be developing titles that are fully utilizing the new hardware. They're going to have to kind of aim for the Switch. It's going to have to be seamlessly scalable between the 2 systems. It's somewhat of a limitation. At the same time, though, this is Nintendo we're talking about. The Switch was so weak, and did you see how it sold? It's really not gonna matter if Nintendo is not fully utilizing their hardware. The games are still gonna look great. Even just a Switch game, but remastered to look and run a little bit better, is gonna be great. We're all still gonna love it. It's still gonna sell 1 trillion copies. Nintendo is still gonna know how to make it look really super good. So that's really not gonna be a problem. Like, if the Switch 2 launches with the next 3D Mario and it looks even marginally better than Odyssey, then yeah, everyone will be happy. It'll sell great. And like I said, this makes the transition between generations super duper smooth. Nintendo is now catering perfectly to both audiences. People who have the original Switch and want to keep playing stuff on it, but then people who are willing to spend a little bit more money on the new system. And of course, that FOMO is going to make more people transition over. Oh, I could keep buying stuff for my Switch, but man, I love the idea of having stuff on my shiny new Switch 2, playing these games, but they look even better, you know, especially if Nintendo offers some sort of upgrade program. Pay $20 or something to upgrade your Switch game to a Switch 2 game, that kind of thing, I don't know. But however they do it, everything is all on one big Switchy ecosystem. Nintendo is still giving us these big, new, exciting games without abandoning that enormous, gargantuan install base that they already have. They really might end up selling more Switches than anyone has ever sold any console ever. That is probably gonna happen. And this way, Nintendo is still making obscene, just mountains and mountains of money from that install base, while also making a bunch of money selling their premium new hardware, their expensive new hardware. And all of this can happen years into the system's life, still raking in so much money and still just easing and pushing people over toward the new system in a slower, more natural way. And then the most important part of this, as the years go by, hardware just naturally gets cheaper and cheaper to manufacture. Throughout a system's life, it just gets cheaper to make the thing, and so the companies are able to make more of a profit on each unit. After a few years, Nintendo is able to produce the Switch 2 more cheaply, so they can finally phase out the original Switch. they phase it out, and they finally make the Switch 2 a little bit cheaper. I know they never really wanted to lower the price of the Switch itself, but I feel like in the case of the Switch 2, it would be important to eventually bring that price down, because if you're going to phase out the original Switch as the budget system, then the Switch 2 has to also become very affordable, and that will kind of ease people into this new era of Switch 2, where, yes, we are expected to all own one, where families are expected to buy multiple because it's cheap enough now. But then even more, now that the Switch 2 is the only system they're supporting, now they can wow us all over again by really utilizing the hardware and making these bigger and better Switch 2 exclusive games. That in itself is kind of an event. Like, wow, these games are looking even better now. This is crazy. The first exclusives. The kinds of games that they couldn't quite make before. Then even on top of that, oh, the hardware is getting easier to produce. Now they can make more new models of the Switch 2. They can make slimmer models. If it's true that the Switch 2 is going to be a little bit like just physically bigger than the original Switch, well, now look at that. Now it's the Switch 2 Slim. And as we know, people, Nintendo fans, they love to double and triple and even quadruple dip on their systems. So that's even more potential money for Nintendo, selling these updated versions. This whole strategy, starting with releasing a system that is a little bit more powerful and a little bit more expensive than we might expect, it offers so many benefits. It offers a smoother transition for customers who might not want to jump on the big new thing right away. Nintendo gets to continue to make money from the previous generation of hardware, and this essentially future-proofs the new hardware, the Switch 2. Because sure, it allows for better backwards compatibility, but then even more than that, the more powerful the Switch 2 is, the more third-party support it will get, the more multiplats. It'll be close enough in power to the PS5 and the Xbox Series X that now games are coming to all of these systems. Nintendo is no longer behind. They're getting the same stuff that everyone else is getting, and it runs just fine. And then the more powerful the Switch 2 is, the more features it can have, and that's even more selling points right there. And the more it will cater to people who are looking for that raw power. It's not a humongous amount of the customer base, but they do exist. There are people who are just like, I just want to play Nintendo games with more power. I want better graphics. I want more capability. Now those people are happy too. Everyone is happy. In this scenario, everyone wins. And that is why I think it just makes a heck of a lot of sense. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Nintendo might not do it. They really might just give us a PS4 powered thing, or like I said, like I kind of originally expected, maybe even a little bit weaker, because it really doesn't matter that much. The Switch 2 doesn't have to be that powerful. We've been playing on an Xbox 360 for the past however many years. Like, it really doesn't matter that much. But if they do want to go this route, I think that that is how they should do it. I feel like it just offers so many benefits. It just makes all the sense in the world. I say that a lot. All the sense in the world. I don't know why. I say it a lot, don't I? Does this all make sense? Am I missing something here? Is there some variable in here I'm not catching? Is there a reason why this wouldn't work? I mean, obviously just the hardware itself. I don't even know what's possible. I don't know, like, I don't know anything about hardware at all. So yeah, for all I know, this is nonsense, but I don't know. It's fun to think about. Thank you for watching it. Thank you for listening to me speculate. I like speculating. I don't know, it's fun. It's a good time. It's one of my best things.